Happy Wednesday, community! Are you all excited for our 9th class trio reveal? I know it's a little midweek surprise for you. Can you hear me? Yes, for those who are asking, we have Thanksgiving tomorrow, so that's why it's Wednesday. Okay, looks like everything is good to go, so turning it over to MJ.
Hey folks, as Genesee said, it's a Wednesday reveal. Told you guys last Friday that, we're on break starting tomorrow. So the studio will be closed on Thursday and Friday. But that doesn't mean something may not be happening when the studio is closed. So we've got bad news. Last week we told you, beta folks, that we were working on getting the big map in for you to see hopefully this week. And no, stuff happens and we just couldn't get the big map. So what do?
I think we make it bigger.
I think so too. So yeah, we went bigger. Skirt, big was good. Bigger is even better. So the big map that we told you about, okay, the heck with that. You beta folks aren't even going to see it. We went even bigger. So let's put this in perspective. The map the hatchery guys and gals were seeing was 16 times the size of the map that all beta, one folks, alpha and IT folks have been seeing in wormling and in hatchery. Well, we did tell you that one of our goals for beta was to have a very large map. And well, Rob, he got it done. And right now the map that is being tested, both on wormling and hatchery, that we hope will be open over the break, is 4 times the size of the hatchery map that you guys have currently seen, but 64, let that sink in for a moment, 64 times the size of the map that you folks in the Friday night fights have seen in wormling. 64 times the size. That's a pretty big map.
Yep.
That's like a gigantic map. According to Rob, it's 166 square kilometers big. It is ginormous. And not only is it a really big map, but it's a really big map full of procedurally generated goodness, thanks to Andrew and the team and Ben for putting this map together as well in very short notice. It took him about, a day based on mods he had already done for the last map. So, hopefully, we're testing it now. We have a couple more hours, a few more hours before, we go on break. But we're hoping to have it open from tonight through the holidays with the 64x map. It's ginormous. It is, when you folks go in, especially beta guys who hadn't seen the last big map, just wait. You're going to be running around and running around and running around. So I think it's pretty safe to say that we've got that part of the tech working pretty well.
Yep, so far so good.
So far so good. So yeah, hopefully in a few hours, you Beta 1 folks will be able to join the Alpha folks and the IT guys all in wormling over the next few days. You might also see potentially some bots going in or some bot testing over the weekend as well, both on Castle on our end, but possibly, who knows, maybe even hatchery. Mark has been making a lot of progress with our bots, and I know you guys are going to love when you see the next test. I think you'll be very surprised at the number of bots that we have running around, and from what I just saw before I sat down, running around really well along with players. So it's getting pretty interesting around here when it comes to some really key tech things like the large map, large battles, all the stuff that we have been working on for many months. So that's in general housekeeping and updates. Guess it's time for the reveal.
I guess so.
So 2 more to go. This is one that I know you guys have been asking for, and it's a pretty exciting one. It's a pretty good one. It's not stealth. Sorry, you folks voted for it. Don't. So I know there are some backers in chat who are probably ready to stab me. But you voted for it. We put up these images. You picked them. We didn't pick them. This was a runaway landslide, not for the stealthers, but instead for the healers. So let's go to the page.
Okay, so here we are on the website. You should know this by now, but if you are new, you can go to CamelotUnchained.com, and in the upper left-hand corner, there's Camelot Unchained drop-down menu where you can see classes. And here is the silhouette you're seeing for letter D, and the trio with the names: Physician, Empath, and Stone Healer. Now, as usual, we're going to sit and have some reading time and have a reading break. So check that out. I'm sure someone will throw a link in here for those of you who don't want to go to Camelot Unchained and just click on something. And we'll have a reading break. There you go. Thank you for the link. Sad.
Are we sad? Oh, no stealths.
There's something fitting, though, about stealth being the last trio reveal, right? It doesn't feel like... Yeah, that probably should have been the last one revealed. Because it was the last really important one that we had talked about that people have been just expecting forever, right?
I would have thought because of the expectation, because of how enthusiastic people are about it, that it would have gotten more of a campaign to get it in earlier as to they really... But, no, apparently not.
Okay, is that a long enough reading break?
Probably.
I think so. Alright, let's get talking about it. Hang on.
Okay, from the Kickstarter, from actually even before the Kickstarter, one of the things that me, have been promising those healers among our backers and future backers or even potential backers, that these healers were going to be not only the best healers in the game, that we weren't going to have classes where everybody can heal, and that pure healers weren't necessary. I've always said that people who play healers were going to love our solution and love our classes. And even if they disagree with some of the ways we're going with this, at least really see why we're doing what we're doing with these healers. So I think overall these are three really interesting healing classes. I think they're very fitting, especially the Vikings, for their lore. And I think, and I hope, and I expect you folks to tell us this over not only the days and weeks and months and years, whether we have kept that promise of creating healer classes that are not only necessary for the game, but are also really focused on being just awesome healers. What do you think?
Well, I think that this is definitely a sort of healer that wouldn't exist probably in another game, because in other games, healers have to be able to level up. They have to be able to go out and probably solo, which means they have to have a lot of damage skills, because if their time to kill is too long, it takes them way longer than a DPS class in order to level up. In this case, we don't really need to worry about that.
Well,
These are pure healers, so
Exactly.
their role is healing, and if they can't do anything but heal, well, that's sort of their point.
Exactly. And that's the big deal for these guys. These folks are not, do not have to worry about how much time they have to spend killing mobs. Because there are no mobs. Well, there are mobs, but there are players, and not the mob, but pitchforks and, right now, okay, sorry. Anyway, they don't have to worry about killing NPCs. They don't have to worry about, what they can do to earn experience, essentially, or whatever system another game may use in order to level up. These classes are all focused on healing. And that's what they're really good at, and that's what they're going to specialize in. Now, of course, they can use weapons. Everyone, as we always say, you can always use weapons. And they will have some skills, because they have to have at least an ability to hit you over the head with something. But they are not focused on that. They do not have to go out and actually do any of that. They can just be pure healers. And from what you've seen from our other reveals, and I can definitely, give you this little hint for next week, there's no healing abilities that we're going to talk about next week, right?
There's a little bit of one of those guys
Yeah,
who's
one of them
focused on
maybe
a
a
little
little bit.
something. Yeah, but not straight up healing. Like
No healing.
None of the other classes except for the devout, obviously, because they're healer hybrids.
Oh, of course.
Really have the same sort of power level of straight up make your health go up, cure wounds.
I just meant for next week.
Yeah, next week is not going to be very heal friendly.
So you guys, you guys out there, who are looking at the healers, who wanted to play healers, who might be worried that, could there be another class coming? No, this is it. These are going to be the absolute premier healers in Camelot Unchained. And let's start with the Arthurians. And the Arthurian healer is called a physician. And I think when you read the lore, see the theme behind the guy, he is not, it's not that you've never seen or we've ever seen a healer class that uses potions, but it is not as common as simply using spells. And we want this guy to be a little bit different. They will use they will use potions. They will use other things in order to make people in their realm want to pick them for 5-mans, right? Sorry. But tell them a little more about it, Ben.
All right. So this guy, thematically, I think, is going to make him a lot more interesting than you would probably expect. Because most of the time when you look at healers, they're some sort of a priest or a cleric or some sort of like a sort of faith-based healer. This guy is more of like an alchemist, mad scientist sort of character that has all these different concoctions that he sort of puts together. And the way that will work out in the game is that you have equipment of these different bottles, and you can throw bottles at people, you can pour bottles on people, but it's really sort of physical based. It's not so much magic based, but the magic is kind of baked into the potions and elixirs themselves. And so in that way, and by using this replenishing horn, you can kind of use up your potions, have to refill them, have a sort of cycle of, will I run out of this and then have to manage that by going back and filling it back up, or do I utilize something else that might not be ideal because I ran out of the thing that I really wanted? And being able to maintain that resource balance, which is actually sort of a multi-resource because of the differences between the different potions and elixirs, will make there be a lot of decisions to be made, even though there's not a whole lot of focus on, buffing and debuffing. There's really just a focus on healing and curing wounds. But the way that you do that is complicated enough, I think, that this is going to be a challenge for people, especially when we talk about our damage model and having multiple body parts.
Exactly. And that's one of the things, again, to keep in mind about these healers. Our system is not simple. It just isn't. With the way the wound system works, with the different body parts, it is not going to be incredibly easy to play a healer. It is something that's going to require skill. It's going to require paying attention. It's not just going to be clicking a couple of buttons and, hey, heal. This is what you healers wanted. You wanted a system that rewarded you for being great healers, for knowing how to play your characters. And, well, the physician is a really good example of that.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on. The next one is the TDD. And the TDD healer is called the Empath. And as the name suggests, it is a healer who uses their own body to heal the wounds, the poisons, the other things that we're going to have in the game of other players. Empath certainly not an uncommon, I don't think yet tropish healer class, but certainly close to tropish. I mean, it's been used. It was used in a Star Trek episode. So,
Is that where this lore came from? It's Star Trek?
It's all about Jem.
Yeah, it did, actually. Exactly. And that was for whatever reason, that was a thought. I remembered that episode and thought of empaths. And, what can we do with an empath and make it interesting? And I think, we've done a really good job of making this empath interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this, obviously, as we talk about non-mirrored classes, this is very different from either of the other two, specifically the physician we just talked about. This is a character that you have to take what's happening to another player and apply it to yourself. So you have to pay very close attention to your own character state and other people's character states and managing between them of, okay, if I have a guy who's very damaged and I'm very damaged, do I want to give up health and then risk taking more damage and getting myself killed in order to have that person healed, or do I want to focus on recovering myself enough so that I have enough health that I can transfer some of that to somebody else and keep everybody alive? So that balance and back and forth of making your health go up, making your health go down, accepting someone else's wounds to cure their wounds to keep them alive long enough so that you can sort of move this management around of these different elements, I think is going to make for a very interesting and challenging class as well, in the same way that the physician is also going to be a challenge for players.
I agree. What were you thinking with the simulacron? There we go.
So the idea of that was, if you have a primary component, if you have like a type of heal that you really wanted to focus on, or that you're in a fight, you're going to be using this a lot. Like if you're trying to do a lot of maintenance healing and you're trying to keep everybody sort of topped off, or if you have like one really big heal that you think is really important, or if you have some sort of pre-healing where you're putting like a bubble shield on somebody, and then that's going to be the main thing that you want to focus on, or it's the highest cost thing you're most worried about running out of, you can put out a simulacrum, which is effectively a copy of yourself, and then use that as a resource rather than using your own health. And sort of in that way you can add another level to your management of your health resource, so that you don't necessarily have to rely purely on your own health, but it's limited to only one primary, so you only get one type of spell that you get to do that with. So you have to be very careful of what you use and what type of simulacrum you put out, so that you can use that specific skill when you need to without costing your own health again.
I think it's a pretty cool mechanic.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. And that's obviously only a few of the samples. There will be some more interesting things that this guy will have that aren't listed here, but we'll get into those more actually in the not too distant future, because this is another of the confirmed classes that we really need to have for Beta 1. So this will be a class that's getting a lot more development here in the very immediate future.
Exactly. And, that for those of you who have wanted healers, you're going to be playing your class before all but 2 other class trios come out. So you're going to have plenty of time to tell us, whether this idea, whether it's the empath, the physician, or the next kind of crazy one, actually, is going to work. We think they will. We think they're going to be a lot of fun. And I don't think you get more fun, quite frankly, when it comes to healing than throwing rocks at people's heads in order to heal them. So the stone healers are the Vikings healer. As you can guess, yeah, that was my idea. I think that nothing fits the Viking realm better than the idea of throwing rocks at people in order to heal them. It actually ties in a bizarre way, of course, with the importance of the runic stones and some of the properties that people, ascribed to them, including healing. So instead of, touching the rock, instead of relying on the rock, instead of somehow getting the magic from the rock, I figure, throw the rock. Hit him in the head, hit him in the body, and heal them. And that's the stone healers. And, look at the motto, healing is pain. Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun with these guys.
Yeah, and so this is obviously a very projectile-based character. And also a sort of deployable-based character, because you're not only throwing these out and hitting people with them, but you're also throwing these out to land them at the locations where people are, and then you're able to use those placements in order to cast additional spells through them. So if you put a stone out on the ground, then you can cast another spell that will make that stone do something and heal your group members around it. And so being able to go out and specifically pick these back up, which is sort of a unique thing to this class as far as the deployable classes in the game so far, that you want to be able to put these things down, pick them back up, get benefits for having picked them back up, and then throw them out again to keep them moving around, because obviously this is a Viking class. It's going to have to go out with all these, close-ranged, heavy mobility characters. So something that had a lot of static placements, that where you couldn't change a lot of where things are placed, wouldn't really work as well. So in this case, these are things that you put out on the ground, but you're also doing a lot of manipulating them. So you're going to be moving around a lot, you're going to be moving your deployables around a lot, and you're going to be throwing things at people, and obviously throwing rocks at people should be fun, just because it's fun.
It just is. I mean, you look at the death curse sample, and there's a little bit of fun there, too. First one to get that, let us know. Anyway, so we've got three classes of healers, all very different. Non-mirrored as always, some BSC healing ideas, some I think very, I hate to say safe, but less difficult would probably be a better word, to describe how some of the healing goes. I think we've created three potential classes that are just going to be, no matter what, fun to play. I mean, if you're a Viking, throwing stones is fun. But on the other hand, as Ben says, using the equivalent of a turret mechanism, for healing is also going to be great. For the physician, for the mad scientist among you, being able really to have even more control over your healing abilities than traditionally you'll find in games is pretty interesting. And for the TDD, an empath makes a lot of sense. So, I think that's really about it, at least for now. Go right to questions?
I guess we can have people ask questions.
I guess. So, yeah. Questions.
Okay,
Hit
ready
us.
for the Q&A. Max, can you slow the chat down, please? And go ahead, ask your questions. They found Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah.
They did find that.
There's a lot of smell what the rock is cooking references.
Excellent.
Okay. For the physician, will you be able to create poisons, afflictions, diseases to cause debuffs to enemy targets, or provide your realmmates with consumables to add to weapons?
These are, again, healers, so they're not going to be doing poisons and negative things like that. As far as applying things to weapons, I don't think they have anything right now that applies to weapons. But you will be able to apply potions to players that have effects that happen, when they're attacked or when they perform certain actions. So there are some triggered mechanisms there, and it is sort of something that acts sort of like a buff, but its purpose really is to function as a mechanism for healing.
Will healers have skills to heal each individual body part, or just main heals that heal injured body parts altogether? If that's the case, what's the point of having a more in-depth style of individual body damage for body parts?
Well, you just answered your own question. So, of course, you're going to have to be able to heal body parts. It would be pointless, foolish, silly to have a healing system where you could simply go heal and all body parts are healed for all your abilities, when we're going to the trouble of creating a wound system where you can take damage on different body parts. So the answer is yes. Obviously, there are going to be spells or maybe abilities that can work across the whole body, but that's not how the game is good. That's not how the majority of spells are going to work. It just would be kind of silly. Yeah. And even if we do it, we'd reduce the overall healing ability. So,
right.
It would not work. If you applied it to the whole body, it wouldn't work as well if you were applying it to a part of the body.
Yeah, and that's the important thing to keep in mind when you look at some of these things. You will be able to do abilities that do, not as specific as, healing this person's head only, but there's a cost for that. So if you're going to try to do like an area of effect heal that's going to heal all the people to all of their body parts because it's just, going over their whole body because it's in an area, that's not going to be as efficient as if you specifically said, I'm going to target this one person, or I'm going to target this one person and only this one specific body part, because that's going to be really efficient, but it's also very specific. So you can kind of have a granularity there of, efficiency versus overall utility of, I just want to heal everybody. I need to heal everybody right now. I don't have time to figure out who has what specific wounds or who has what specific health levels. But if you do figure those things out and you can pay attention to a smaller subset of people, which is why having a healer-based group as opposed to healing for a large amount of players like in a big Zerg battle, you want to have your healers grouped up with a limited number of players that they're paying attention to so that they can use some of these more specific, more efficient heals.
Exactly.
How exactly do you plan to make the empath work in a way that isn't detrimental to small-scale RVR?
Maybe you could clarify, what way do you think it's detrimental to small-scale RVR?
Health transfer, I believe is what they seem to be referring. Why is health transfer going to work here instead? I don't know. If you cloaking donkey, do you have a more detailed question, go ahead and ask it again, and I'll ask them.
Yeah, we
to
can
clarify.
get more details on that.
Yeah. Is the empath going to be the first target in our VR?
Well, that's always the question, right? And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about healers, if we're talking about, when we were doing the mage reveal, that was a question a lot of people asked too.
Yeah.
Are you immediately mean because you're going to have flame wardens and other people who can cast damage spells over a distance, are they going to be the first ones targeted?
Mm-hmm.
Now we're doing healers, and now are they going to be the first ones targeted? Look, it depends on the situation, right? It depends, how you're running. Are you running in a group? Are you running in a group going against other groups? Are you running in a group going in as part of a siege? So, are healers going to be targeted first? Well, that really depends. Will they be able to defend themselves through force of arms? They'll have some, but they're not meant to, stand there, take a ton of damage, and just, you can't kill me, haha, and I can, just keep healing myself. It's obviously not going to work that way. So, will healers be a target? Absolutely. But so will mages, and so will other, classes. It really depends on the situation.
Yeah, and keep in mind that healers are meant to be supportive of their group, of other players, more than they're supposed to be self-healing tanks where they can just soak up massive amounts of damage and keep themselves alive. So they will need help from their allies to help protect them, to help heal for them, to help them keep at a distance, to keep from getting, the class that we'll talk about next week that might be a problem for them.
Might be.
They will need some help from their groups to really function effectively, to keep from being focused down early in fights. And there will also be ways to deal with healing in an indirect way when you're talking about taking out a target who is being healed and being able to apply debuffs that make healing less efficient against them, so that you will have a choice that it's not just we always have to kill the healer first because we can't kill anyone until the healer dies.
Exactly. And what Ben said earlier about self-healing tanks makes it, is very on point, to what we said at the beginning of this discussion about soloing and PvE and leveling. You're not going out there having to be a solo healer trying to kill NPCs in order to level, to complete quests in order to level. So the things that we're doing here, very different than you would see in WoW or even Dark Age of Camelot, because you aren't going to be a PvE player. You're just an RVR player.
Other than the encumbrance penalty for the physician, do you see these archetypes wearing heavier armor?
Sure. In theory, keep in mind that there are penalties for wearing heavier armor. So that's a trade-off. Are we going to say, and again, we said this right from the beginning, it's pointless to have a system where we say you can wear anything you want, but the moment you start wearing something that we don't want you to wear, really bad things happen. We're not doing it that way either, but there are some penalties for it. You can choose to go out in heavier armor. Will you be fine most of the time? Depends what you're playing. Will it be a good idea to go around running about naked? No, that would be a very, very bad idea in our game. But as a healer, you're also not going to be a clothy. You're not going to be required to wear almost nothing and die when people get close to you. So that's not going to be an issue.
A number of questions about healer vision. Is it still in? And some questions about what it might look like.
Yes, we're still talking about it. It's not in. That is something that we're going to be working on for beta. Would we like it to be in? Absolutely.
Yeah. And so far, we've done some mock-ups. You saw James Q's mock-up of it not long ago. So it's something we've continued to be looking at. It's something we will continue to develop, and hopefully we can come up with a good solution. If we can't, obviously it won't be used. But if we can, then I think it'll be a good addition to the game.
Exactly, and I think we'll get it in.
Is Viking healer encumbrance higher than the others to drag these stones around?
Obviously, we'll work it out so the Vikings, just the same with the physicians or any other class, things will be balanced so that the Viking healer, it doesn't go out there like
his bag of rocks,
with a bag of rocks dragging.
Yep,
I'm coming. Wait up for me, guys. I'm still coming. No, it won't be. Obviously, it won't be like that. After all, it's magic. So if these magical stones don't weigh as much as real stones, or the magical stones start small, and then when the ability is cast, they become larger. Big stones. It's a world of effing magic. So yeah, don't worry about it. We wouldn't handicap the Vikings that way, or any of the realms.
Does the physician create their own potions in town or in the field?
Both. It's going to be like the magic, like the magic users. That should you be doing stuff before you go out? Absolutely. That's part of magic. Can you do it in the field if you have what it takes? Sure. Why not? Can you do it in the middle of combat? Sure. Just like you can take your armor off in the middle of combat while somebody is beating your head with a giant mace. Bad things will happen.
Will Stone Healer have an AoE heal or single target only?
Stone Healers actually have quite a bit of area heals. They're mostly group targeted, so that they'll affect your group members around the area. But that's, I think, one of the examples in here has...
I thought you did.
A part of that where, you throw a stone out, and then you can use a spell on the stone to make it have an area around it. So a lot of it will be based on these positional locations that are derived from where you throw these stones out.
Have you decided how many body parts a character will have?
I think we have. Are we going to talk about that?
So we'll say for now, yes, there is a number. We'll talk about that more once the wound system is really in and working properly. But the thing to keep in mind with the number, that could change.
Yeah.
I mean, if we find that it's just too big of a pain in the neck for players, or it's just not fun, we'll cut it out. We knew that this, certainly this part of the combat system was going to be a bit trickier. We knew it was going to be trickier, but we also don't feel like it's insurmountable because it's working now. But we have to see if it's fun. And if it's not fun, it's got to go.
Most of the heals seem to be physical projectiles. Friendly melee characters may be nigh impossible to heal. What systems are going to be in place for the challenge of healing a friendly up in the front of a melee character?
Right, so because our projectiles are very physical based, and because you have to have line of sight and you can't just, be in the middle of this giant mass of people and heal the guy who's in the middle of it, you are going to have to take positioning a lot more seriously. And that's one of the ways that we're going to have a lot of balance, because you can't actually hit that guy with a damage spell from the other side either. So there's going to be some careful positioning going on where you have to figure out, where are your archers, where are your mages, where are your healers, how are you going to make sure that you have range to people. And as I've talked about before in other conversations when we've discussed how healing is going to work and how it's going to be something that players are going to have to deal with, as a player who is not playing a healer, you're going to have to take some of that responsibility on yourself. If you're taking a bunch of damage and you're someplace your healer can't get to you, run back toward the healer so that they can heal you, and stop so that their big, slow healing ball will hit you. That's something that is going to take effort from everybody who's playing, and not just the healers. It's not just their responsibility to make sure you can get healed. Just like when you're in a raid or whatever, if you're running out of range of the healer, it's kind of your own fault. So that will be even more prevalent in this game because of the physics and because of the line of sight requirements.
Hey, do you think that the things that we're doing, like line of sight and projectiles, might have an effect on those things that you folks love so much? What are they called? Oh, buff bots. Yeah, you think that might have, a little detrimental effect on people who might still try to play, buff bots?
Well, their AI will just have to get better.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, as we also have been talking about forever, folks, we know that a lot of you, most of you, probably almost all of you, who are listening to this, weren't big fans of buff bots, especially when they were parked behind walls and things like that. And we told you right from the get-go that we were going to deal with it in multiple ways. Well, here's one of the ways. I mean, if you're parked behind a wall and you've got, your other character on the other side of the wall, good luck throwing those abilities through the wall. It won't work. Same with just having a buff bot parked within range, but, sort of sitting off, and you think all you need to do is just hit a button and not do anything. You can't do that either. So, is this a way to defeat all buff bots? Of course not. But it is, as always, just one of the ways that we can both design, I think, classes that are fun, interesting to play, challenging to play, and at the same time combat something that we know the vast majority of you didn't want to see in Camelot Unchained. Here you go.
I know you keep asking, and I keep skipping them. We're not taking res questions right now, so that's why they're being skipped.
Well, they don't know that.
Okay.
We should tell them.
We should tell them.
We told them a couple times ago, but they might not remember.
Just to
okay.
remind you folks, no questions about resing right now. that is still something that, look, we've talked about it on the forums, we've talked about it, during the Kickstarter as well. We're looking at that just as we're looking at crowd control to figure out the best way to handle it in this game. Does this mean there'll be no rezzing? Same thing I've said from the beginning. Just don't worry about it yet. We'll come up with something good, just as I think we have kept our promise to the healers to create really good classes, while at the same time also discouraging buff botting, two things that I promised during the Kickstarter.
There you go. We're not ignoring you. Okay. Any concern with the stationary throwing mechanic, like the Stone Healer, for a realm that seems to be predicated on being active engagers of combat versus a sustained realm like the Arthurians or battlefield control like TDD?
Great question.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things about throwing is you don't have to stand still like you have to when you're casting a spell. So even though it does slow you down a little bit, and having to deal with some of that lack of mobility that's inherent in having projectiles and having spell casting, and especially having deployables that you're putting in static locations on the ground, that's sort of one of the difficulties that is meant to be overcome by playing this class well, is how do you deal with having to put out these static things and pick them back up and throw them back out, and how do you deal with having these projectiles that you have to throw in order to keep up with the melee guys that are running around all over the place. Being able to do that will be hard, and that's kind of the idea. Is it's not supposed to be easy. If we made it so that all you're doing is instants and you're not having to worry about your mobility because you could just be running around spamming out heals and it's really easy, there wouldn't be a lot of challenge. So we are trying to implement mechanics that might be a little bit counterintuitive, because you would think, well, that makes it harder, right? Well, yeah, it does make it harder, and we're trying to make sure that we balance that out well. So how much of a penalty is it that you're throwing things? How long do these things last? How easy and hard is it to pick them up? How far are the distances? Those are all things that we're going to have to balance as we get into testing these classes, and they are going to take a lot of testing and iteration, which is why we're trying to get these things in early, because healing is such a core part of this game. I don't know how much I can overstate,
you can
how
just keep
important
saying it
healing
again
is,
and again and again,
because having a game in which health bars don't just purely go down, in which there is an attrition that doesn't just involve people running out of mana, healing is going to be a really important thing for the game overall, and so making sure that these classes get tested well and get good mechanics and are able to do all the things we need them to do as part of the overall roles for their different realms is really going to be very important.
And keep something in mind, folks. I know some of you are probably worrying about the projectile, especially aspect of these characters, or running out of blood, or running out of whatever it is that powers your abilities. We've always said, and again, this goes back to the Kickstarter, that when you have a more difficult mechanic in this game, we're going to balance it out with more power. Healing is going to be really powerful, because we know that you're not going to be able to hit every time. We know that your projectiles are going to get interrupted or blocked. We know things are going to happen. And if we set up a system where you had to be accurate every single time, or your people died, that wouldn't be fun. That would destroy the concept of healers. So don't judge or don't think that your healing class is going to operate in the same way, for example, as the mages do in our game, or in the build right now, where you can run out of blood more quickly, where you can be more limited. If it is difficult, if it takes more careful planning, if it takes a little bit of luck for these things to actually work properly, then we are also going to give that character powerful healing spells and additional, the ability to have cast additional spells before they run out of power, essentially. Because otherwise the healers would be useless. And as Ben has said, and I have said, and anyone who's worked here said, healers are absolutely one of the core classes of this game. It's why they're going in as one of the first, beta classes, and why we're doing what we're doing here to make them powerful, to make them interesting, but requiring healers to be actively involved in their healing and not just sitting back and spamming buttons.
Is there any synergy between healers and the devout?
There's some synergy. It's not as direct mechanically as some of the other character interactions, but there will be, as far as the gameplay is concerned, and as far as, if you have a healer and they're getting attacked and you want to balance out your group so that that can be handled, you probably want to have at least someone else who can help them out a little bit. So being able to put both of those into a group is really good. Being able to have, more than one devout in a group might be good in some cases. It depends on if your situation is going to require a lot of healing or if you're going a lot more damage heavy. So there should be some interesting interactions there in terms of the actual gameplay, but not as far as the specific mechanics where the healer does something to the devout that specifically has interactions with him and his abilities, because there's quickly the potential for that to become very, very strong.
How do you stop ability bloat, having 80 abilities to heal and cleanse each body part with a self-crafted system?
So that's one of the things that's going to happen in this game in a lot of cases, is that you're going to have the opportunity to make yourself a lot of different abilities. And so if you took and created every permutation of every ability, you would wind up with a lot of buttons, and it would quickly become unmanageable. So you sort of have to decide on a style and managing what direction that you want to go. Also keep in mind that this is a learn by doing progression system. So in order to progress all of those different buttons, you would have to be using them all, and you'd have to be using them all fairly equally to keep them all relatively on par with each other. So that's something that's not likely to happen. What you should probably do is kind of pick an emphasis and go towards that direction, and then you will have less of the overall set of things that you're actually working with. And that balance of having enough buttons but not too many buttons is something that we're going to have to look at from our end, but also something that you'll have to work out from your end as you try to manage the buttons that you have created for yourself.
And if we find that the way we've set up this system in terms of crafting abilities becomes just too much of a pain, that you have way too many abilities because you want, whether it's healers or mages or anyone else, because you want to target different body parts, then that's a matter of simply changing what the targeted part is and not the rest of the ability. So there are options that we can certainly look at in terms of changing the system in order to make it a little bit easier. But keep in mind, this is a game that was absolutely kickstarted on the idea of not having an 8-button hotbar with all your abilities. This is how we pitched it to you folks from even before day one, that we were going away from that sort of approach. There's nothing wrong with games that go down that route. I love Guild Wars too. It was a lot of fun, but that's not the route we're going. So are you going to have a lot of abilities? Will you have to manage a lot of abilities? Absolutely. Is it going to be so insane that it's unplayable unless you just have the most amazing macros set up, or the great mice or keyboards, or however your rig is? No, because that would be unfun and pointless. And as you folks have seen, certainly over the last couple of years, I'm happy to look at something and go, yeah, it's not working, and we need to change it to make it more fun, just as we have with the 10 class trios versus the more complicated, path system. So don't worry about it. If it doesn't work, we'll change it. That's the advantage of who we are and what we're doing here, being the nice indie game studio where we can make that kind of decision without needing to get lots of approvals and sign-offs and things like that.
Okay, Cloaking Donkey's back with a clarification. Basically, he's asking how if the empath gives away all his HP, how can he survive in a group versus group situation where he has to deal with self-damage and damage caused by the enemies?
Okay, so largely his situation is that he is not just one-to-one transferring. So he's going to be getting himself, he can heal himself, but he can't directly heal other people. He kind of has to give his health to other people. So he has to sort of balance out keeping himself alive, giving some health to somebody else, getting his own health back up, how far down he wants to let himself go before he brings himself back up, before he heals someone else. So this sort of up and down thing means that he'll be able to deal with incoming damage differently, because he does have some self-healing as long as he's relatively protected and doesn't get disrupted too much. In a large-scale situation, it's not really that different from any of the other healers. If he gets focused, he's going to have problems. If he gets really stressed and a lot of people need healing, he's going to have problems. It's the same thing with Physician. He's going to run out of his potions. It's sort of the same thing as a Stone Healer. He's going to run out of his rocks, and he's going to have them all scattered. He's going to have to go out picking them all back up. These healers all sort of have these issues where you can stress them and you can put them in situations where their healing starts to drop off in effectiveness because they're in a situation that they have a hard time dealing with. And that's one of the ways to heal, to deal with healers that doesn't involve directly just killing them off.
Will healers have any abilities to help defend against sieges?
Defend against sieges? Well, healers' abilities during siege battles are going to be efficient because they're not necessarily under as much threat immediately. So if you are in sort of the standoff phase of that where the walls are still being attacked and you're back up on top of the walls or you're down on the ground and there's not a lot of melee characters in your face, your abilities are going to be much more effective because you don't have to worry about high disruption health abilities because there's not too much stuff being thrown at you right then. And being able to heal the more periodic damage of these projectiles that are going back and forth, people being able to just step back out of range and then get a heal and then move back into range. Healers will be pretty good at that. That's one of the situations where it's going to be more efficient for people to maybe get out of that siege situation and actually climb up on top of the walls or get out of one of the back doors of a keep and come around and flank and bother them in some way, because if they're just left on their own, healers are really, really strong. And I think that's maybe one of the really important things we should kind of clarify is that healers are very powerful, but it's really easy to mess with them. So if you're not messing with them, they're just going to be very, very strong. And as soon as you start doing things that kind of mess up their plan and start disrupting their abilities or making them move or making them do things that they weren't planning to do, as far as spending extra healing on keeping themselves alive, they start to drop off in effectiveness. So your ability for your group to defend your healers and your ability on the offensive side to kind of not only kill the healers but just bother them enough that they're losing some of that effectiveness so that you can draw some of the healing attention away from the targets you're actually trying to kill will be part of the important strategy.
Will the primary form of heals be direct healing or heal over time?
I wouldn't say that there's a primary form either way.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
Healing over time and healing directly are obviously two of the sides that you see of a lot of healer classes. A lot of them are just like, this is a heal over time class that just stacks hots on people all the time, and then you have another one that's just like, this just makes health bars go up in big chunks all at once. There will be sort of both of those, and you'll be able to go down, I don't want to say paths because we've sort of gone away from that as a term, but it is sort of a direction of if you want to focus more around one thing or another, or if you want to focus more around specifically targeted heals versus area heals, or you want to focus around curing wounds more than you're talking about healing health, or you're focusing on, there's going to be a lot of different things in there, and so you will have these different options. It'll be part of each of these classes that you can heal in multiple different ways, as is your preference and as fits the role that you're trying to play.
Are the Stone Healer rocks an inventory item that must be managed?
No. There'll be an inventory item in the sense of you're going to have to carry them. You're going to have them on you. But we're not going to, penalize, as I said earlier in the discussion, or the Q&A, we're not going to penalize the Viking healers or the physicians to make it so onerous to be a physician or a stone healer that you're not going to. Most people aren't going to want to play it just because they're starting off at a big disadvantage. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, I'd say it's like carrying arrows around, right? Where it's like you have to carry these because they're part of your kit and they're a thing that you use, but it's not going to be you're carrying around a big bag of rocks because that's too heavy. But there are items, and you do have to have them created, and you can have different loadouts of them, and so it is an item, and it is sort of an important aspect in that way.
But to me, manage sounds like you're looking at the old school RPGs, right? Where you're taking the sword and you're putting it in the bag,
in the slot
in the bag, and that's something that we've said from the beginning isn't going to be part of this game. Inventory management is more about weight than it is, slotting in things. So it's not going to be a problem in the sense of if you aren't going, we're not going to put you in a position, for example, of carrying so much that you can't carry anything else, or you're carrying so much that you're walking really slowly, or you can't carry very much. So same as Ben says with the archers, that you feel like you always have to run back to the city. No, because that's just boring.
Questions about how the stone healers self-heal if they hit themselves in the heads with rocks.
Yeah, we'll see if we can get
There
that
you
as
go.
an animation.
For the physicians, will they get that from crafters, and can they expire? Potions.
Yeah, potions and stones and stuff are crafted items, but everything in the game basically is crafted. And I don't think potions have expiration dates on them.
I think it will depend, right? I was about to say yes and no, and everyone here was going to laugh, so I stopped. It's going to depend. So I think, and we really haven't talked about this much, but my gut is the vast majority of potions won't expire, and then maybe some special ones, just like we might do that with arrows as well, or even, just plain old spells that you have to use within a certain amount of time to have them at full power. But that's something we haven't even had anything more than preliminary, not even discussion about, just a mention.
A concern about the conception that healers should be more challenging and difficult to play, and the concern is that they are already the least appreciated and played job in the MMO sphere. Is that going to make people not be anxious to be healers?
I don't think so, because the healers are going to be very important to this game, very powerful in the game. So, if are they going to feel unappreciated? I think healers feel unappreciated no matter what game they play. I think you're absolutely right. I played a healer a few times, and every time I swore I'd never go back. Not because I didn't enjoy healing, I just didn't enjoy the lack of love if you weren't absolutely perfect.
Well, if you are perfect, you go unnoticed.
Exactly.
And if you're not perfect, everything is your fault.
It's true.
It's like sysadmins.
So, will it making it a little more complicated possibly discourage some people? Maybe, but on the other hand, the power that you get as a healer, and as important as you are to this game, because we are making no compromises with our system. We've said from the beginning, again, healers are important, whether you're a pure healer in the case of this trio, or whether you're a member of the Devout. You are somebody who is going to have a very important role, whether it's in groups or in sieges when groups. So, will you feel appreciated? I hope so. One other thing to keep in mind, and it's obviously very important, and I've talked about this before and today, is the whole idea of leveling without having to kill NPCs. Your realm will appreciate you. So maybe, the pug isn't, too happy because you weren't awesome. On the other hand, when you get your realm rewards in the morning and you see, what you get from your king, hopefully that will make you feel at least a little more appreciated by us, because we love you healers. We told you from the beginning of the Kickstarter that we were going to devote a lot of time and energy to making these healers, these healer trios great. And you guys supported us in the Kickstarter. I know there's a whole bunch of you who were and are big healer fans. And so hopefully you think we've done a good job. And I do think no matter what, when we get this system right, because I have no doubt we're going to get it right, I think that you're going to enjoy playing, that the vast majority of you are going to enjoy playing it. And I hope that will make you feel appreciated.
Will healing projectiles interact with other spells via air, and is there any example of an air interaction?
Projectiles are projectiles are projectiles unless we say otherwise. So everything can interact with each other.
Skipping down. So many rock jokes. Okay. If you guys want to start asking any questions about what we talked about earlier as well, with the map or things like that, and any other reveals.
It's a big map.
Okay. What would you say is some of the direct overlap between roles and responsibilities of the healers and the devout? A number of questions on those two comparisons between healers and devouts.
Okay, so the devout and healers, the devout are sort of hybrid healers that are sort of between where mages are and where healers are. And so the overlap is that the devout sort of play a partial healer role. And so their overall effectiveness as a healer is not as much. But at the same time that they're doing healing, they're also doing damage and other things. And so in that way, their roles overlap, but only in so far as they both make health go up and can cure wounds and can sort of help your group members stay alive. Healers are obviously much better at that because it's basically all they do, but they're trading off that they're not doing damage or very much else the way that the devout can. And so I wouldn't say that you can sort of pick one or the other, but it's a good thing to be able to have that flexibility and say, how much healing does our group really need for what we're doing, for the situation that we're in, for the composition of group members that we have, for the sort of play style and the sort of specialization and the way that we're geared. Do we need a lot of healing? Do we want to have 2 healers? Do we want to have 1 healer and a devout? Do we want to have, 2 devout or only 1 devout? How many of these things do we need? And then put your composition together sort of based on that as one of the important elements that you look at.
Are healers still said to have a floaty rune system which will allow people to see what a healer is casting?
Oh, absolutely. Whether it's floating runes or rocks flying through the air or things like that, yeah, absolutely. It's part of the exact shape that it takes. Obviously, will be determined based on the class, how the class finally ends up. But the idea of knowing what your opponent or someone else is casting, kind of important to this game.
Will we see, besides bottles, something else, perhaps scalpels, forceps, etc., for the alchemist's arsenal?
Honestly, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Can healing be prioritized by body parts with the most wounds, so healing can be simplified like priority, less specific, general, etc.?
Well, that would be something that if we found that the current system wasn't working, that certainly we could talk about. But right now, we're still going for body parts.
Yeah, well, there are some abilities in here, I think, that do mention that they heal the most damaged body part or cure the body part that has the most wounds. So there are some abilities that will have the functionality of auto-prioritizing for you. And a lot of those come in at the early levels of the progression where you don't have all of the specificity that you're going to get later in the progression. But they also come at the cost of not being as efficient. So you can sort of throw them out without as much careful planning, but at the same time, they're not going to be as efficient as if you did that planning and use some of the more advanced abilities that you'll be able to progress into later on.
Exactly, and like I said, we really don't want to go down that path for all abilities unless we absolutely have to.
How will captured enemy souls affect or be utilized by healers, if at all?
That's a good question, and honestly, I haven't thought about it. Let me think about it. So, in theory, with what we discussed and have written about with souls, in theory, if you are a healer and you get the soul of other realms, potentially, players from other realms, potentially you could use their souls to buff abilities against a certain realm. We have talked about abilities in the past that can be more targeted to members of a certain realm. So I could absolutely see using captured souls on certain higher level abilities to increase the effectiveness of any ability that you were going to use potentially against another realm, even though we haven't talked about any of them yet. Yeah. But I think that would be one way we could do it.
We have talked about making them into items too.
Correct.
And so the ones of these that are item based, that's
true
be a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, last question. Can 2 healers in a group trade potions and stones if they're running low on a particular type, or are they specific to a certain person?
That's a good idea. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, they are items, so you're going to
not?
have them crafted, and you're going to get them made by someone else and buy them or something. So obviously you can trade them between players if you needed to. Probably not something you want to do in the middle of combat. If like you're in the middle of fighting and here, take this.
That's a good question.
But if you're out in the middle of the field and you're like, oh, I'm running low on something, if somebody else in your group who is even not a healer has some of these because they bought them from someone because they were like, oh, well, I'm a warrior, I'll just carry around a bunch of extra stuff that I don't even use, but my group members might need. That's, of course, something that you can do.
I die a lot. Here's 20 of this potion.
Here's a bunch of potions.
Why not?
And there have been other games where that has been a responsibility sharing thing that players have done.
Okay.
Cool. So folks, thumbs up, thumbs down. What do you think?
What do you think of the healers? Tiggs wants to know what the perfect ratio of turkey to ham is for Thanksgiving, by the way.
More turkey. Ham's more delicious in the morning with eggs. Oh, interesting.
Oh, we don't know.
There's a bit of both.
Okay. All right, so before, let's keep this going then. So for those of you who've put a thumbs down, let us know why. Curious.
Thumbs down, people. Let us know what your thoughts are on that.
I think some people are afraid of being hit with rocks.
Possibly.
That might be.
No. Don't run to the forums. Here's your opportunity to ask live. Concerned about the UI taking over the screen.
Well, that would be the same for, mages as well, realistically, or any of the classes.
Well, to some extent. Healers typically rely on unit frames and party frames a lot more than other people. But that's sort of why we are looking at things like healer vision, so that you can look out at the people in the world and see what their health state is without having a bunch of UI widgets that you have to necessarily stare at.
True, but when you look at classes that, maybe the one we're talking about next week, where you would be looking to disable, various body parts, not just take the big giant sword always and hit somebody over the head, could you have a play style, would you have play styles where you would, have so many different abilities targeting very different body parts? So I think it would apply to any of the classes. Well, not any, to a lot of the classes as well.
Well, that guy even doesn't care so much about...
And I just wasn't referring, just
Okay,
guys
well,
next week.
that's... Yeah.
Complexity is the word I would use to sum up the...
That's what I thought. Yeah.
That it's too complicated. Well, a lot of the things in the game across the board are more complicated than a standard MMO. I mean, it's hard to really talk about a standard MMO, but it kind of has become that over not so recent times. In more recent times, MMOs have been diverging more because it got too standardized and it kind of got too stale, and there was too much copying of the same mechanics over and over again. And so now it's kind of branching back out. But if you look at that time when there was this sort of, World of Warcraft convergence where a lot of games were following the same typical methodology, there was a lot of simplification that went into that, and it was a lot of streamlining. It was to make it more mass appealing, and there was a lot of reasons behind it. But kind of diverging from that and going back to a lot of older mechanics, a lot of tabletop mechanics, using a lot of these things, does make the game complexity level go up. But it's also to make the game longevity go up. And because we're having things like the air system, because we're having things like multiple body parts, because we're having things like the way that the disruption system works, that hopefully will add more stickiness to the game and a lot more sort of skill level flexibility, and where there's always something a little bit better you could be doing. There's always something a little bit more that you can learn. If it was very, very simplified and it was very easy and the skill cap was fairly low, then you would get to a point where, I'm about as good as I'm ever going to be, and I can't really get better, or I can't really think of a different way to go about doing this. And so the possibility space being so limited kind of would take away from this in a lot of cases. Now, healers specifically being too hard, that's something that we're definitely open to. If we discover that, we put all these abilities in and healers are having a really hard time keeping up, or they're just seen as being really inefficient, and no matter how powerful we make them, the inherent complexity in playing them just makes them not work out very well, then we're definitely open to simplifying their mechanics or streamlining some of these ways that players can go about performing this role, I guess, in the game, that it won't be sort of a hard line of they must be this hard, they must be, the hardest class in the game to play, because they're not even intended to be that. They're intended to be challenging, because all the classes in the game are intended to be challenging, but they're not supposed to be overwhelmingly hard. And we already realized that healing, as far as keeping your entire group alive when there's all these sources of damage coming in at different rates that have spikes and swaps and distance checks and all these different things, that is a hard job already. So we're aware of that and aren't intending to make this impossible to play or even harder than some of the other classes we have to play. But it's going to be challenging, and that's just the way that the game is in a lot of cases.
And keep in mind, when it comes to body parts, it's not like you're going to have to, click on the body part in the middle of melee. You're not going to, have to aim like you do a bow and arrow, for example, in the real world, and just target exactly where you want to hit on the guy. Because that, in a game like this, would be very difficult even too difficult. Much more difficult for a healer, there we go, than I would normally like, and I think we would normally like. So keep that in mind. Again, these guys have to be fun to play, but we also want this to be a class where if you're a really good healer, you are a really good healer. And it is not just going to be a class where, I can just run up and ult, and quickly be a really effective healer. You're going to have to know how to play it. And that was one of the ways I wanted to reward the folks who are pure healers, who really want to play healers, just like we're doing with crafting and other things, where if you're really good at this, you are really wanted, within your realm. They're going to want you in pugs. They're going to want you in, in castle sieges. So that is going to take a certain amount of skill, but don't worry about it from is this going to become an action game, and I'm going to have, just awesome physical skills to play a healer, because that's not what we intend at all. So anything else on thumbs down?
Basically that, and then some people that say just playing healers that only heal is boring. Of course, we have devout and other options if you want to do things besides just heal.
Oh, for the healers who want to play pure healers, it's not boring. I mean, if you want to be a pure healer, that's what, this is what you're going to want to play. If you're going to want to be a combo, if you want to be a hybrid, if you're going to want to actually go out and, kill stuff and still heal, then the devout is for you.
Yeah.
But again, one of the reasons it's boring in PvE games is you can't level your character. If you're just healing, how do you level a character in a PvE game?
Yeah, and hopefully not a lot of people are actually looking at this as a PvE game, or from a PvE game player's perspective. A lot of players are obviously coming for PvP games to begin with, but if you're looking at the way that you'll play a healer just in PvP in any game, it's harder than in any PvE game, as pretty much across the board. PvP healing already has a lot of challenges built into it, and we are very aware of that and don't want to overwhelm that. But on the other side of it, for the people who are like, well, it's boring, all I have to do is, manage health, and obviously in our game there are wounds that you'll also have to cleanse or cure, and if you're worried that that's all you have to do and that the only thing I do is make health go up and cure wounds, then play a devout, because then they also have to deal with having damage, they have other utility abilities that they will also be able to use, and they have healing built into them as well. So if you're looking for something that's even harder than this, we already have the devout archetype for you. If you're worried that this is already too hard, then just stick with this, and hopefully between the different types of heals and different mechanics for being able to keep people alive, there will be enough complexity built into that for you that you won't have to be worried about having not enough to do.
Okay.
Is there anything else, Jesse?
Nope. Just talking amongst themselves on different types of healing and things of that nature, so nothing else I think we need to address, although we do have the forums for you to talk about it afterwards. But if you have anything you want to talk about now, write it quick. Those are the two main things, complexity and boredom.
Some people...
Two opposites.
It's too complicated. It's boring. It's not...
That's why I do believe that the pure healers, the ones who really want to play healers, and that's their focus, I think they're going to love it. I think once whatever the final system is, because as always, we won't be convinced that this is the right way to do things until we actually see them in the game, until we've actually gone through beta, at least beta 1, and see how it plays. And again, if it doesn't play well, it's not like it would be hard to go back to a more, to a simpler, more tropish healer.
Yeah, and that's, as much as we kind of shy away from that, that's always kind of our fallback of like, if we really wanted to make a lot of the elements that are more BSC in this game that don't turn out well work, it's very easy to do that because we know how to make these work that have worked in other games, that we could simplify a lot of these things, that we could remove a lot of the crazier elements and take it back a step to something that's more well understood and that we've implemented in our various games over the years. So
Exactly.
It would be very easy to back off on a lot of these things, but hopefully many of them we won't have to do that. And that, even though some of them it's likely we will, that'll still leave us with a large number of things that are new and exciting and interesting that make this game different and something that you haven't seen before over and over again.
Okay, then, since we already took the vote, I'll say Happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there who celebrates Thanksgiving. And even if you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, get a turkey anyway. They're delicious. We'll have an update for you in the next couple hours. It won't be a development update. We just had a big one on Friday. It will just be an update on whether and what will be up over the next few days for you folks to test. If all goes well, Wormling and Hatchery will be open, but I'll let you know in 2 to 3 hours, if not before, since I don't know what magic the team has been working while we've been here, other than people opening eating cookies
they
and
really
crackers
like those cookies.
that was sent to us. So that's all I got, Ben.
Well, we've got one more of these.
Yeah, we do. I wonder what class it's going to be.
Yeah, it's still hidden. They don't know.
Yeah. I think we've been pretty sneaky about it so far. Yeah. Yeah.
Should we make them vote anyway? We could send out a survey.
We could. That would be funny. That would be really funny to send out a survey with just one
option.
Just one option.
We just like it when you click things.
But no, we're not going to send out another survey, though it would be fun. Isn't that how some elections happen in certain countries? We're all going to run one candidate. But no, we're not going to send out a survey. But I will send out, an update letting you folks know what's open. So then, on behalf of everyone at CSE, have a great Thanksgiving again for those who celebrate Thanksgiving. We are closed tomorrow and Friday. Hopefully, I'll see you folks on the forums and in Hatchering and or Wormling. As always, thanks for the support. Thanks for buying nice amount of merch, by the way. I just sent off some new numbers to Merchline in terms of what they're going to stock the store with. And we're already talking about some swag for next year. So thanks as always, folks. Again, great holiday, and we'll see you soon.